Tell me where she is right now!
Nobody remembers the woman who saves the room. They remember the fire, the smoke, the man who walked out, but never the quiet hands that pulled the alarm. Keisha Williams had spent 26 years being that alarm, unheard, unnoticed, until the night Seoul's most dangerous man sat beside her hospital bed at 3 a.m. and realized, with the particular horror of a powerful person confronting their own blindness, that she had been the most important person in his house all along. If you've ever been overlooked while doing the most, this story is for you. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because Keisha Williams did everything right and still ended up in the ICU. Let's make sure she doesn't get forgotten twice. Drop a comment, did she deserve better? The thing about nearly dying is that it reorganizes your priorities very quickly. 1 minute Kang Min-jae was reviewing acquisition documents in the back of an armored vehicle. The next, 3 black SUVs were blocking the tunnel exit like they'd been parked there by someone who planned things carefully. Someone who knew his route, his timing, and the exact gap in his security rotation that opened every third Thursday at 11 p.m. Professional, patient, personal. The attack lasted 87 seconds. His security team neutralized the threat with the brutal efficiency of men who understood that hesitation was just dying slowly. Min-jae walked out of that tunnel with a cut above his left eyebrow, a ruined jacket, and the particular stillness of a man who was not afraid, but was paying attention. Back at the estate, everyone was talking. His intelligence chief, a sharp-jawed man named Lim Dae-won, who communicated mostly in terse syllables and migraine-inducing PowerPoints, had already assembled a team. The Security Council met at midnight. Names were proposed, theories circulated. Someone suggested a rival faction from Busan. Someone else mentioned a Japanese consortium they'd been monitoring for 8 months. Nobody mentioned the Maid, because nobody ever mentioned the Maid. It was Oh Seung-jun, the senior guard with tired eyes and 20 years of service who smelled permanently of vending machine coffee, who found her. She was unconscious in the East Corridor. Her arm was at an angle that arms were not meant to achieve. A sealed package was still partially tucked under her body, one hand clenched around it even in unconsciousness, like her grip hadn't gotten the message that she was no longer awake to send it. Seung-jun called it in with the voice of a man recalibrating everything he thought he understood. The paramedics came, then the doctors. Then the report reached Min-jae. He read it standing at his desk, still in a suit that smelled like tunnel smoke, and he read it 3 times because some sentences require multiple passes before the brain accepts them. The staff member, Keisha Williams, household, level 3 clearance, had flagged 3 separate security anomalies over the preceding 21 days. A mismatched delivery manifest, an unregistered vehicle near the east garage, irregular movement patterns near the service entrance. Her reports had been filed, reviewed by junior staff, categorized as low priority, not escalated. She had modified the departure schedule twice in the past week. Tonight, she had intercepted a package intended for the main office. She had been attempting to reach senior security when she was intercepted. She did not scream. Min-jae set the report down. He picked it up again. He looked at the name, Keisha Williams. He searched his memory for a face and found nothing useful. A shape, perhaps. Someone who moved quietly and disappeared before conversations began. Someone who had been part of the estate's background the way crown molding was part of a ceiling. Present, structural, and entirely ignored until the day it prevented the roof from collapsing. He was in the car before he told anyone where he was going. Yonsei Medical Center. ICU. 4th floor, room 7. He stood outside the door for a long time. His head of security, Lim Dae-won, stood beside him with the expression of a man who had many urgent questions and the professional wisdom to ask none of them. The doctor approached carefully, the way people approached Min-jae, with the energy of someone walking toward a large, unpredictable animal that had not yet decided whether to be friendly. She suffered significant injuries, the doctor said. She was conscious briefly in the ambulance. She repeated one sentence before losing consciousness. Min-jae looked at him. What sentence? The doctor swallowed. Tell him, it's someone inside. The corridor went very quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of a room full of people who had just understood something cold. Min-jae looked through the window of room 7, bandaged arm, bruised face, a monitor tracing her heartbeat in green lines that seemed, in that moment, unreasonably fragile. He walked in, pulled a chair beside her bed, sat down. Outside, 3 of the most dangerous men in Seoul stared at the floor, because the most feared man in the city had just sat vigil beside a woman whose last name he'd had to read off a medical chart. And not one of them had the faintest idea what to do with that information. The first thing Keisha Williams saw when she opened her eyes was a ceiling. White. Sterile. aggressively lit in the way that only hospitals and interrogation rooms seemed to think was acceptable. The second thing she saw was him, Kang Min-jae, sitting in a chair that was clearly too small for a man of his particular energy, wearing a suit that had seen better hours, with dried blood near his left eyebrow that nobody had apparently been brave enough to mention to him. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't scrolling a phone. He wasn't doing anything that normal humans did while waiting. He was just watching her, like she was a problem he was trying to solve, or a person he was trying to see for the first time. Keisha's first instinct, honed by 26 years of being a black woman in rooms where her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, was to make herself smaller, apologize for taking up space, ask if she'd done something wrong. Her second instinct, sharpened by whatever painkillers were currently doing excellent work through her IV line, was considerably more direct. "You're still here," she said. Her voice came out like gravel wrapped in sandpaper. "Yes," he said. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Min-jae was not a man who filled silence out of social obligation. He let it sit between them, heavy and unbothered, until Keisha had to resist the urge to apologize for asking. "You said it was someone inside," he finally said. She closed her eyes briefly. There it was. She hadn't imagined that part. "The package," she said carefully. "The tracking manifest from 3 weeks ago. The numbers were transposed, not a typo, a substitution. Someone generated a secondary label using internal codes. That requires a state clearance. Level 2, minimum." Min-jae's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, the way deep water shifts when something moves beneath the surface. "You remembered the manifest from 3 weeks ago." "I remember everything." She paused. "It's not a party trick. It's just what happens when you spend your life in rooms where nobody expects you to be paying attention." The silence returned, different this time. "How many anomalies did you flag?" he asked. 3 formal reports, 2 schedule adjustments, 1 photograph of an unregistered vehicle I sent to your security email." She watched his face. Nobody responded. Min-jae said nothing, which told her everything. "They thought I was being paranoid," she said. "Not bitter, factual. People always think that. It's easier than admitting the quietest person in the room caught what the loudest ones missed. You should have escalated further." Keisha turned her head to look at him directly, which required more physical effort than she'd anticipated, and produced a pain level she chose to ignore. "To who?" she asked. "Your intelligence chief barely makes eye contact with staff below level 4. Your head of security once walked through a room I was actively cleaning and looked directly through me. I tried Oh Sung-jun because he was the only person in that building who had ever once acknowledged that I was a human being standing in a hallway." She paused. He nods. "Did you know that?" Your senior guard nods at people. Revolutionary concept. Something moved across Min-jae's face that might, on another man, have been called guilt. On him, it looked more like a reckoning. He leaned forward slightly. "The package? What was in it?" "I don't know. They got to me before I opened it. But the internal codes used to generate that label, I cross-referenced them with the delivery logs from the previous month. The same code pattern appeared twice. Both times on days you had external meetings. Both times routed through the East receiving dock. She let that land. Whoever did this has been planning it for at least 6 weeks. And they know your internal systems well enough to weaponize them." The monitor beside her beeped steadily. Min-jae stood. He walked to the window. Seoul spread below them, indifferent and glittering, a city that did not pause for anyone's crisis. "You could have left," he said quietly. "When you realized what you were looking at, you could have walked away." Keisha considered that. "I thought about it," she admitted. "For about 45 seconds. What stopped you?" She looked at the ceiling. "Same thing that always stops me. A beat. I'm very bad at pretending I didn't see something." He turned from the window, looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the bedside table. A phone. New. Sealed. "My direct number," he said. "Not security. Not Lim Day 1. Me." She stared at it. "If you remember anything else," he said, "you call that." He moved toward the door. "Mr. Kang." He stopped. "The person inside," Keisha said carefully. "They know I survived, which means they know I can identify the code pattern." A pause. "They're going to come back." Min-jae looked at her over his shoulder. "Let them try," he said quietly, and walked out. Keisha stared at the phone on her bedside table for a long time. Then, slowly, despite everything, the bruises, the bandaged arm, the machines, the absolute absurdity of her life, she almost smiled. Lim Dae-won had a headache. This was not unusual. Lim Dae-won operated in a state of near-permanent cranial pressure that he managed with black coffee, ibuprofen, and the quiet resignation of a man who had chosen a career path that did not include stress-free afternoons. He was good at his job. Exceptionally good. 22 years in intelligence, 8 of them serving Kang Min-jae, had produced a mind like a steel trap and a personality like a steel trap that had been left out in the rain too long. He did not like being outperformed by household staff. He liked it even less when his boss knew about it. Min-jae had called him at 5 a.m., not to reprimand him, which would have been manageable, but to brief him. Quietly, methodically, using information sourced entirely from a woman with a bandaged arm in ICU room 7 who had, apparently, been running a one-person counterintelligence operation from inside the laundry schedule. Lim Dae-won had sat in his office afterward and stared at the wall for 11 minutes. Then he'd opened the delivery logs himself. The code pattern was there, exactly where she said it would be. He found it in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. He had a team of 9 analysts, and they had missed it for 6 weeks. And a woman whose job description included ironing pillowcases had spotted it while reorganizing courier manifests. He closed the file, he opened it again, he took 3 ibuprofen and got to work. Across the city, in a restaurant that served overpriced Japanese whiskey to people who needed their sins to taste expensive, a man named Yoon Tae-sik was having a considerably worse morning. He was 41, deputy head of estate operations, 13 years of loyal, or convincingly loyal, service to the Kang organization. He had good shoes, a bad conscience, and a phone that had been vibrating with increasing urgency since 2 a.m. The message on his screen was simple: she survived. 2 words. He'd read them approximately 40 times. Tae-sik was not a stupid man. Stupid men didn't last 13 years in this organization. He had calculated, when he'd made his arrangement with the consortium 6 weeks ago, that the risks were manageable. The plan was clean. The access codes were untraceable, or so he'd been told by people who were, he was now understanding, considerably less competent than advertised. He had not calculated for the Maid. Nobody had calculated for the Maid. That was the thing about invisible people. You forgot to include them in your risk assessments. They existed in the background of your plans the way furniture existed in a room. Static, unthinking, decorative at best. Keisha Williams had been none of those things. He signaled for another whiskey. His phone buzzed again. Clean it up. He stared at the message. Then he did something that a smarter, more self-aware man might have done 6 weeks ago. He thought about what Kang Min-jae did to people who threatened things he protected. He put the phone face down on the table. He did not order the whiskey. Back at Yonsei Medical Center, Keisha was having an argument. Not with a person. With a nurse named Cho Yeon-hee, who had the cheerful, immovable energy of someone who had selected her career specifically because it gave her institutional authority over people who thought they knew better. "You need rest," Yeon-hee said pleasantly, adjusting Keisha's IV with the serene confidence of a woman who had won this exact argument 400 times. "I need my notebook," Keisha said. "You need rest." "The notebook is in my jacket pocket. My jacket is in that cabinet. I need to write something down before I forget it." "You can write it down after you rest." "I have a photographic memory. I don't forget things." "That's not the point. The point is that writing helps me organize what I remember into something useful. And right now I have something very useful trying to organize itself, and if I don't get my notebook in the next 4 minutes, I am going to write it on this bedsheet with the pen I can see in your front pocket." Nurse Cho Yeon-hee looked at her, then at her pocket, then back at Keisha. She retrieved the notebook. 10 minutes, she said. Then you sleep. 20. 15. Done. Yeon-hee left with the expression of a woman who had just negotiated with a headache and was not entirely sure who'd won. Keisha opened the notebook. Her arm protested. She ignored it. She wrote quickly, not the code pattern, she already had that mapped completely in her head, but something else, something that had been sitting at the edge of her consciousness since the corridor. A detail so small she hadn't processed it in the chaos. The men who'd intercepted her. They hadn't been wearing masks. Amateur mistake. Unless they hadn't expected her to survive to describe them. She wrote that down. Then she wrote something else. One of them had a lanyard. A Lee Estate lanyard. Not a visitor pass. Not a contractor badge. Permanent staff. She underlined it. Twice. Then she picked up the phone Min-jae had left on her table and pressed the only number saved in it. He answered before the second ring. Of course he did. The men who attacked me, she said without preamble. At least one of them is current staff. I saw a permanent access lanyard, green border. The kind issued to level 3 and above. Silence. Then, very quietly, are you certain? I'm always certain, Keisha said. That's been the problem all along. Min-jae hung up the phone. He stood in the center of his private office, a room that had witnessed negotiations, ultimatums, and at least 3 conversations that had permanently altered the trajectory of Seoul's criminal architecture. And he was still. Not the stillness of calm. The stillness of a man doing rapid, precise calculations behind a face that gave nothing away. Green border lanyard, level 3 and above. He pulled the access roster from his secure tablet without calling Lim Day-won. Not because he didn't trust him, because right now he didn't trust the air in the building. Keisha had said it was someone inside, and inside was a word with many rooms. Level 3 clearance. Current staff. Present on the estate Thursday night. 41 names. He read through them the way he read everything. Completely, once, retaining what mattered. He stopped at one, then kept reading. Then came back to it. Yoon Tae-sik, Deputy Head of Estate Operations. 13 years of service. Level 3 access to East Receiving Dock, delivery manifests, and departure scheduling systems. Min Jae set the tablet down. He picked up his main phone. Called Lim Day-won. Pull Yoon Tae-sik's access logs for the last 8 weeks, he said. Everything. Entry times, system queries, physical access points. Cross-reference with the delivery anomalies from the Williams report. A pause. The Williams report, Lim Day-won repeated with the careful tone of a man acknowledging that his intelligence division had just been formally named after a maid. Is there a problem? No, sir. Good. I need it in 2 hours. He hung up, walked to the window. Seoul in daylight was a different animal. Loud, efficient, aggressively productive. A city that treated ambition like a competitive sport and sleep like an unfortunate biological requirement. From this height, it looked almost simple, organized, clean lines and clear purpose. He knew better. Every clean surface had an underneath. He thought about Keisha Williams, writing reports nobody read, and adjusting schedules nobody questioned, and photographing vehicles nobody investigated. He thought about the 45 seconds she'd said she considered walking away. He thought about a woman who'd spent her whole life in rooms where the furniture got more consideration than she did, choosing, for reasons she described with the flat practicality of someone stating weather facts, to stay. I'm very bad at pretending I didn't see something. He thought about 13 years of Yoon Tae-sik sitting across tables from him. Briefings attended, loyalties performed, the specific, exhausting theater of a man playing a long game. Min Jae was familiar with long games. He'd invented several. The access logs arrived in 90 minutes. Lim Day-won, to his credit, looked like a man who had not slept and was not planning to until this was resolved, which meant he looked essentially how he always looked, just with marginally more urgency around the eyes. He laid the report on the desk without preamble. Tae-sik queried the departure scheduling system 11 times in the past 6 weeks, he said. 8 of those queries occurred outside business hours. He accessed the East Receiving Dock manually on 4 separate occasions, twice without logging a reason. The delivery code pattern Miss Williams identified traces back to a system terminal that Tae-sik accessed on the 14th. He paused. There's more. Min Jae looked up. His financial records, and I want to be transparent that obtaining these required methods that are technically inadmissible in a court of law. Continue. 3 transfers, routed through a shell account in Macau. The first arrived 6 weeks ago, 2 days before the initial delivery anomaly. The amounts are... Lim cleared his throat. Significant. Min Jae leaned back. Where is he now? That's the issue. Lim's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't report for his morning briefing. His apartment shows no activity since approximately 4 a.m. His personal vehicle is still in the estate garage. He's running. It appears so. Find him. Lim nodded once and moved toward the door. Day 1. He stopped. The men who attacked Miss Williams in the corridor. At least one had a permanent staff lanyard. I want every face on estate security footage from Thursday night identified by noon. Not reviewed. Identified. Lim turned slowly. She told you that from her hospital bed. She told me that the morning after she was attacked, with a fractured arm and a concussion, having retained a detail that none of our trained personnel thought to report. Min Jae's voice remained entirely level. So yes, she told me that from her hospital bed. Lim Day-won, who was not a man given to visible emotion, had the decency to look like he was experiencing something in the vicinity of professional shame. Noon, he said quietly. 11, Min Jae replied. At Yonsei Medical Center, Keisha was not resting. She was technically horizontal, which Nurse Yeonhee had accepted as a reasonable compromise, but her mind was doing the thing it always did when she gave it a problem and told it to stop. It kept going. She was thinking about the lanyard. Green border. Permanent staff. Level 3. She'd seen it in the half-second before the corridor light went dark. Her brain had photographed it the way it photographed everything, automatically, without consultation, filing it under important retrieve later. But there was something else, something smaller. The lanyard had a name badge. She hadn't processed it consciously. The situation had not been conducive to leisurely reading. But somewhere underneath the adrenaline and the impact and the specific unpleasantness of a corridor floor at speed, her brain had caught 3 letters. T, A, E. She stared at the hospital ceiling. T, common syllable. Could be dozens of names. Or it could be the beginning of one specific name belonging to one specific man who had been inside that estate for 13 years and knew exactly which schedules to adjust and which packages to reroute and exactly how much the invisible woman down the hall noticed. She reached for the phone, then stopped. Because Min Jae had called her first. One word on the screen. Tae-sik. We know. Stay in the room. Keisha read it twice. Then she set the phone down and looked at the ceiling with the particular expression of a woman who had just been told that the thing she'd figured out alone, the thing nobody had believed for weeks, had been confirmed. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. Some sentences wrote themselves. Yoon Tae-sik was not, by nature, a man who panicked. Panic was for people who hadn't planned their exits. Tae-sik had planned his exit the same way he planned everything, methodically, quietly, with the particular attention to detail that had made him valuable to the Kang organization for 13 years, and subsequently valuable to the people who wanted to dismantle it. He had a bag packed. He had a passport that was not his real passport. He had a contact in Incheon who could move people across borders the way other people moved furniture. Efficiently, without sentiment, for the right price. What he did not have was a car, because his car was still in the estate garage, because leaving it there had seemed, at 4 a.m., like a reasonable misdirection. Leave the car, take a taxi, disappear into the city before anyone connected the logs. Lim Dae-won would inevitably pull the moment Min Jae started asking the right questions. He had not anticipated that Min Jae would start asking the right questions at 5 a.m. He had not anticipated Keisha Williams would still be alive to give them to him. He sat now in a guest house in Mapogu that smelled like instant noodles and poor decisions, watching his second phone with the focused anxiety of a man whose first phone he'd already destroyed. His contact at Incheon wasn't answering. His contact at Incheon's backup wasn't answering. His contact at Incheon's backup's backup had answered once, said, "I need an hour," and then gone silent 40 minutes ago. Tae-sik was beginning to understand what it felt like to be on the wrong end of a closing window. His second phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it. It buzzed again. Against every reasonable instinct he possessed, he answered, "Silence." Then a voice he recognized immediately. Calm, unhurried, carrying the specific weight of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be the most dangerous thing in a room. "Tae-sik," Min Jae said pleasantly. "You left your car." Tae-sik said nothing. 13 years, Min Jae continued. 13 years of briefings. 13 years of access. 13 years of... A pause, nodding across tables while I made decisions you were quietly selling to people who wanted me dead. Another pause. "How much did they pay you?" Tae-sik's jaw tightened. "Enough to leave," he said. First mistake, confirming he was on the line. "Evidently not enough to succeed," Min Jae said. "Your Incheon contact is currently unavailable. Permanently. Your backup is having a conversation with 2 of my associates in a parking structure in Yongsan. Your backup's backup." Min Jae made a small sound that was not quite a sigh. "I genuinely feel sorry for your backup's backup." The room felt smaller. "You missed one thing," Tae-sik said, because cornered men talk and he had never learned to override that particular instinct. "The consortium doesn't stop because I'm caught. This is bigger than one operation. Bigger than one maid who noticed too much." A silence that lasted exactly long enough to be deliberate. "She has a name," Min Jae said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Her name is Keisha Williams. She has worked in my household for 2 years. She filed 3 security reports that your people buried. She modified my schedule twice to protect a man who didn't know she existed. She intercepted your package with a fractured arm and a concussion coming, and she still managed to leave me more actionable intelligence than your entire buried division produced in 6 weeks." A pause. "She also apparently negotiated a 15-minute notebook allowance from a hospital nurse at 6 a.m., which I find, if I'm honest, disproportionately impressive given the circumstances." Tae-sik had no response to that. "You called her invisible," Min Jae said. "Your consortium called her a non-variable. Your people didn't even include her in the risk assessment." The pleasant tone hadn't changed. That was somehow worse. "I've been thinking about that." "Min Jae." "You're in Mapogu," Min Jae said. "3rd floor, the guest house with the broken neon sign. You have approximately 6 minutes before this becomes a conversation you cannot walk away from. A beat. Or you can walk out the front door right now and into the vehicle waiting outside, and we can have a different kind of conversation. One where you tell me everything about the consortium, names, structure, timeline, everything." Tae-sik closed his eyes. "And if I do? Then I'll remember that 13 years of service, however it ended, produced 13 years of information that is now worth considerably more to me than your disappearance." Another pause. "I'm not known for mercy, Tae-sik, but I understand utility." 5 minutes. The second phone was sweating in his hand. He thought about the consortium, about the people above him who had moved him like a piece on a board and paid him in transfers through Macau and promised him things that, he was now understanding, they had absolutely no intention of delivering. He thought about Keisha Williams on a corridor floor, holding evidence with a fractured arm for a man who hadn't known her name. He thought about what it meant that she'd done that. He thought, for the first time in 6 weeks, with something resembling clarity. He stood, picked up his bag, walked down 3 flights of stairs that smelled like instant noodles and the specific aftermath of bad choices. The vehicle outside was black, unmarked. The man leaning against it looked at Tae-sik with the flat patience of someone who had been told to wait and had absolute confidence in the waiting. Tae-sik got in. At Yonsei Medical Center, Nurse Yeon-hee arrived for afternoon rounds to find Keisha Williams sitting up in bed with her notebook open, her expression focused, and the particular energy of a woman who had absolutely not been resting. "You were supposed to sleep," Yeon-hee said. "I did sleep," Keisha said. 4 hours. It was very restorative. "I have a question." Yeon-hee closed her eyes briefly. "What?" "If someone wanted to send flowers to this room, hypothetically, would they need to go through the main desk or could they access the ward directly?" Yeon-hee stared at her. "This is a security question," Keisha clarified. "Not a flower question. Why would you?" The phone on the bedside table lit up. "Min-jae. One message. We have him. You can rest now." Keisha read it. Read it again. Then she looked at Nurse Yeon-hee with the first fully relaxed expression she'd worn in 3 weeks. "Never mind about the flowers," she said. And for the first time since a Thursday night corridor had rearranged her life entirely, Keisha Williams closed her notebook, set down her pen, and slept. Tae-sik had 13 years, and he still underestimated the wrong person. 3 weeks after the ICU, Keisha Williams went back to the estate. Not because anyone asked her to, not because her contract required it. Mrs. Park had sent a stiff, grammatically impeccable message during week 2 explaining that Keisha's position had been placed on administrative hold pending resolution of security matters, which was corporate Korean for "we don't know what you are anymore, and it makes us uncomfortable." She went back because she had left her good cardigan in the staff wardrobe. That was it. That was the whole reason. She told herself this firmly during the entire taxi ride, while adjusting the sling on her healing arm, while rehearsing the 11-second interaction she planned to have. Walk in, retrieve cardigan, walk out. That would not involve extended conversation, emotional complexity, or Kang Min-jae. The estate looked exactly the same. Of course it did. Estates owned by men like Min-jae did not visibly reflect interior upheaval. The gardens were immaculate. The entrance was staffed by guards who were new. She noticed that immediately, and who looked at her with the careful attention of people who had been specifically briefed on who she was. That was different. The old guards had looked through her. These ones stepped aside and nodded. Small thing. She felt it disproportionately. Mrs. Park met her in the entrance hall with the expression of a woman who had prepared several versions of this interaction and was now selecting between them in real time. "Miss Williams," she said finally. "Mrs. Park," Keisha replied. "I left a cardigan, yes." A pause containing multitudes. "I had it laundered." Keisha blinked. In 2 years, Mrs. Park had communicated with her primarily through task lists and the specific silence of institutional disapproval. She had never once referenced Keisha's personal belongings with anything resembling consideration. "Thank you," Keisha said carefully. "It's a nice cardigan," Mrs. Park said with the stiff sincerity of a woman for whom this sentence had cost something. They stood in the entrance hall. "Your reports," Mrs. Park said suddenly. "The ones you submitted." "I reviewed them." A pause. "I was the one who categorized the first one as low priority." Keisha said nothing. "I thought you were..." Mrs. Park stopped. Started again. "I didn't think." "You didn't think I'd know what I was looking at," Keisha said, not unkindly. Factually, Mrs. Park's jaw tightened. "No," she admitted. "I didn't." Another silence. "The cardigan is in the staff room," Mrs. Park said, and walked away with the rigid posture of a woman who had just done something that required the rest of the day to process. Keisha watched her go. Then she went to get her cardigan. She was in the staff corridor. Good cardigan retrieved, 11-second plan approximately 40 seconds from completion, when she heard footsteps behind her. She knew them. She'd spent 2 years learning the sound of that particular stride, the unhurried, certain cadence of a man who had never once needed to rush because the world arranged itself around his timing. She kept walking. "Keisha," she stopped. It was the first time he had ever said her name, not Miss Williams. Not the oblique reference of someone speaking about her to other people. Her name, from his mouth, in the corridor where she had spent 2 years being furniture. She turned around. Min-jae stood at the corridor's end in a dark suit that probably cost more than her Baltimore apartment's monthly rent, looking at her with an expression she didn't have an existing category for. Not the cold calculation of the boardroom, not the controlled stillness of the ICU, something less defended than either. "You came back," he said. "For my cardigan," she clarified. His eyes moved briefly to the cardigan folded over her good arm. "Of course," he said. A pause. "How is your arm?" "Healing." "The concussion?" "Resolved." "And I'm fine, Mr. Kang," she said. "I'm fine, and I got my cardigan, and I was about to leave." He nodded slowly. Did not move. Did not produce any indication that he intended to let this interaction resolve itself in 11 seconds. "I've been reviewing the staff structure," he said. "Security protocols, reporting channels, the categorization system for flagged reports." She waited. "Everything you submitted should have reached me directly," he said. "There was no system for that. There is now." Keisha looked at him. "That's good," she said. "For the next person who notices something." "I also reviewed your employment file," she stilled. 2 years, he said. "No performance reviews, no salary adjustments, no," he paused, "acknowledgement of any kind. That's a standard household staff experience." "It shouldn't be." The corridor was very quiet. Keisha shifted her cardigan to her other arm. The sling made the movement awkward, and she refused to wince about it. "Mr. Kang," she said carefully, "I appreciate what you're saying. I do. But I want to be clear about something." She met his eyes directly, something the old Keisha, the invisible Keisha, had trained herself not to do in this building. "I didn't save your life because I wanted to be acknowledged. I saved it because I saw something wrong and I couldn't unsee it. That's just who I am. It doesn't require a debt." Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. "I know that," he said. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" Another pause, the kind that had weight. "Because I don't know your favorite food," he said. "I don't know where you're from. I don't know." He stopped, recalibrated. "I've been in this building for 8 years, and I know the maintenance schedule for every mechanical system in it. I know the quarterly performance metrics of every senior staff member. I know the exact square footage of rooms I have never once entered." He looked at her. "I don't know anything about the person who saved my life. And I find that," a pause, "unacceptable." Keisha stared at him. "You find it unacceptable," she repeated. "Yes, that you don't know my favorite food. Among other things." She looked at this man, this dangerous, controlled fortress of a man who had just admitted a personal failing with the same directness he probably used to authorize wire transfers, and felt something shift inside her chest that she immediately decided to examine later. Much later. In private. "Baltimore," she said finally. He waited. "I'm from Baltimore. I like jollof rice, specifically my grandmother's version, which means no version in Seoul is going to come close. I'm 28. I have a degree in international studies I haven't used yet. I take too many notes, and I remember everything, and I have been told this is either impressive or exhausting depending on who's doing the telling." Min-jae absorbed this. "Jollof rice," he said. "Don't. I wasn't going to. Whatever you were about to arrange, don't." She pointed at him with her good hand. "I don't want a chef flown in. I don't want a restaurant reservation. I don't want a grand gesture." He closed his mouth, opened it again. "What do you want?" he asked. The question landed differently than either of them expected. Keisha looked at him, at the corridor where she'd spent 2 years disappearing, at the man standing in it who was, for the first time, refusing to let her. "A conversation," she said quietly. "A real one. Not a debrief. Not a security review. A beat. Just a conversation." Min-jae nodded once. "Then have dinner with me," he said. "Tonight." Not a command. Not quite a question. Something in between that somehow felt like both. Keisha picked up her cardigan. "I'll think about it," she said, and walked past him toward the exit. Behind her, for the first time in 8 years inside these walls, Kang Min-jae smiled. Small. Private. Entirely his own. Keisha said yes. She decided this at 7:43 p.m., standing in the bathroom of her temporary apartment, the one Min-jae's office had arranged without asking, in a building with actual security, which she had accepted with the pragmatic grace of a woman who recognized that some arguments weren't worth having when her previous address had a broken lobby buzzer and a neighbor who played trot music at midnight. She had spent approximately 4 hours telling herself she was going to say no. The reasons were organized and sensible. She was his employee, technically, administratively, pending whatever Mrs. Park's hold status resolved into. He was Kang Min-jae. She was Keisha Williams from Baltimore with a second-hand coat and a degree she hadn't used yet. The power differential alone was a spreadsheet nobody wanted to open. She had a healing arm and a concussion history and exactly 0 experience navigating whatever this was. All of that was true. Also true, he had learned her name. He had sat beside her hospital bed at 3 a.m. He had called Tai sick from a burner phone and said she has a name with a quiet fury that had made a traitor get into a car voluntarily. He had smiled in an empty corridor when he thought nobody was watching. Keisha had been watching. She always was. She put on the green dress, the one she'd bought in Itaewon 6 months ago for an occasion that had never materialized, and called a taxi. The restaurant was not what she expected. She had braced for spectacle, for the kind of establishment where the menu had no prices and the lighting was specifically calibrated to make powerful men look important. She had prepared remarks for that scenario. Composed, appreciative, impossible to misread as impressed. It was a small place in Bukchonhanok village. 8 tables, warm light. The kind of menu that was handwritten and changed daily and did not take reservations for anyone, which meant Min Jae had either called ahead with the specific energy of a man unaccustomed to hearing the word full, or he had simply arrived and the universe had arranged itself accordingly. Knowing him, probably both, he was already there, standing outside, not inside, waiting in the cold like a person, like someone who understood that arriving first and being comfortable while the other person navigated an unfamiliar neighborhood was a choice, and had chosen differently. He saw her. Something in his expression did the thing she still didn't have a category for. "You came," he said. "I said I'd think about it," she replied. "I thought about it. And? And here I am." She looked at the restaurant. "This is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Something with a sommelier named after a French region." He almost smiled. "I know a place like that. I didn't think you'd enjoy it. You don't know me well enough to know what I'd enjoy." "That," he said, "is exactly why we're here." They ate for 3 hours. Not because the food demanded it, though the food was extraordinary, a rotating sequence of small plates that arrived with the quiet confidence of a kitchen that had nothing to prove, but because conversation, once it started between them, turned out to be unexpectedly difficult to stop. She told him about Baltimore, about the hospital doubles and the degree that was supposed to take her somewhere, and the visa that had taken 14 months because bureaucracy treated patience as a prerequisite for ambition. About her grandmother's jollof rice, which she described with the specific reverence of someone for whom food was memory made edible, the pepper balance, the party rice versus the everyday rice distinction, the way her grandmother stirred it with a wooden spoon that had been in the family longer than most of the family. Min Jae listened the way he did everything, completely, without the performance of listening, without the fractional distraction of a man waiting for his turn to speak. He asked questions that were not small talk. He asked about the degree, about international studies, about what she'd intended to do with a mind that cataloged courier manifests and security patterns and 3-letter badge fragments in half-lit corridors. "I wanted to work in policy," she said. "Conflict resolution. The kind of work where noticing things actually changes outcomes." "It does," he said. "It did." She looked at him across the small table. "That was a different kind of noticing," she said. "Was it?" He considered her. "You saw a pattern. You documented it. You escalated it through every available channel. You adapted when those channels failed. You made a judgment call under pressure and executed it alone." A pause. "That's not housekeeping, Keisha. That's intelligence work." She absorbed that. The way he said her name had stopped startling her sometime around the 2nd hour. She wasn't sure when. "Tai sick," she said. "What happens to him?" Min Jae's expression settled into something more familiar, the controlled stillness she'd spent 2 years reading from corridors. "He's cooperating," he said. "The consortium is larger than one estate operation. What he knows is useful. And the men who were in the corridor. Identified. Handled." She nodded slowly. "I don't need details," she said. "I know. I just need to know it's finished." "It's finished," he said, simply, without decoration. She believed him. That surprised her, the immediacy of it. She was not, by history or temperament, a woman who handed trust to powerful men on the basis of one dinner and a hospital vigil. She had built her entire survival architecture on the opposite principle. But she believed him, perhaps because he hadn't asked her to. They walked afterward. Bukchon at night was a different city. Quieter, older, the Hanok rooflines cutting dark shapes against a sky that Seoul's light pollution had turned a hazy amber. Her breath showed in the cold. She had her good cardigan on under her coat, which she found privately funny, given that the cardigan had been the excuse that started all of this. Min Jae walked beside her at a pace that matched hers. Another small thing. She was collecting them. "I want to offer you a position," he said. She looked at him. "Not housekeeping," he said immediately. "A security intelligence role, working directly with Lim Dae-won's team. Formalizing what you were already doing. Pattern recognition, anomaly identification, internal threat assessment." He paused. "With an actual reporting line to me, no more sliding notes under doors." Keisha was quiet for a moment. Lim Day 1, she said carefully, looked at me in that hospital corridor like I was a logistical inconvenience. He now refers to your documentation as the Williams Report, Minjae said. Internally, without irony. She stopped walking. You're serious. I don't make professional offers as a conversational exercise. I have no formal intelligence training. You have a mind that caught what 9 trained analysts missed over 6 weeks. He stopped beside her. Training is a process. What you have is considerably harder to acquire. She looked at him, at the city behind him, at the life she'd arrived in Seoul with, the duffel bag, the second-hand coat, the visa that had taken 14 months, the rent sent home to Baltimore, the questions she hadn't been allowed to ask. I have conditions, she said. Something in his expression shifted, not surprise. Something warmer. Of course you do, he said. My own reporting structure. Access to whatever I flag goes directly to you. No intermediate categorization. A salary that reflects the role, not the role I was doing before. She met his eyes. And nobody calls me the help. Done, he said, without hesitation. I haven't finished. Then finish. She looked at him for a long moment. This, she said quietly, gesturing between them with her good hand. Whatever this is, it doesn't affect the professional structure. If I bring you something and you disagree, you tell me why. We don't, she paused, complicate the work with the other thing. The other thing, he repeated. You know what I mean? He did. The amber sky hung over Bukchon. Somewhere below them, the city moved in its relentless way, indifferent to 2 people standing on a quiet street, negotiating the architecture of something neither had planned for. Agreed, he said. She nodded, turned to resume walking. Keisha. She stopped. He was looking at her with that expression she still hadn't named, the one that had no category in her existing library because nobody had ever looked at her quite that way before. Like she was someone worth the full resolution, like he was done seeing her at a distance. Thank you, he said. For the 45 seconds. She frowned. What? You said you considered walking away for 45 seconds. A pause. Thank you for the other side of that decision. Keisha Williams, woman from Baltimore, woman who noticed everything, woman who had spent 26 years being invisible in rooms that were better for her presence, looked at the most dangerous man in Seoul, standing in the amber dark of a city that had once been just an address on a work visa. She felt something settle inside her. Not rescue, not relief. Something quieter and more permanent than either, recognition. Don't make me regret it, she said, and walked into the rest of her life. She came to Seoul with a duffel bag and changed everything by simply refusing to look away. If Keisha's story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about the women who hold everything together while the world looks elsewhere. Drop a comment. What was your favorite moment? Keisha deserves to know she was seen.